this is a lipstick colour I like to call whatever. I tried. Anyway, so how you all doing? It's been a while. It's been a while because I had laryngitis and, you know, I sounded like Darth Vader with lung cancer, but, you know, we pushed through it. And when I say we, I mean just me really, because it's my body and my white blood cells. But thank you to the 60 of you that have subscribed to this channel, which is pretty cool. So as promised, here is my second video for Elementary or Sherlock. Basically, all these videos are just going to start with me generally talking about the character and what their function was in the original narrative, and then I'm going to talk about how that character has been interpreted over time, and sort of finish up with a comparison between Sherlock and Elementary and how that element of the original story is used in those newer versions of the texts, which is cool. Well, not cool, it's actually really nerdy, but that's just who I am. Today's Elementary or Sherlock is going to focus on Dr. Watson and the character's relationship with Sherlock Holmes. So, Dr. Watson was first introduced to us about 125 years ago in the story in A Study in Scarlet. If you've seen A Study in Pink or any version of Sherlock Holmes ever, you will be familiar with how this story goes. Dr. Watson is looking for a flatmate because he's a returned army veteran and goes to the hospital and sees Sherlock Holmes doing weird shit to the bodies and goes, yeah, that one. And of course then he learns that his new flatmate is a crime-solving, drug addict, violin playing person. Dr. Watson's function as a character wasn't necessarily to be Sherlock's best friend, it was more just to be someone who we saw Sherlock through. Because really, you know, Sherlock Holmes, if he was left by his lonesome, he would solve all the crimes and he would not talk to a soul about it except for the client. I think you need to look at a character in a more constant way than that. So Dr. Watson was the way for Dr. Doyle to do that. As I've also said in other videos, I think that Dr. Watson's function was also to lend some legitimacy to Holmes's work because of his status in the army and his status as a doctor. He is the voice of moral reason and the voice that allows us to question reason. He's only intended to be a sort of soundboard for Sherlock. He's not actually that well developed as a character, and neither is Sherlock Holmes in the original stories. Doyle didn't really care much for character development. He was more just about the cleverness of deducing created characters as needed to explore this new science. Dr. Watson's purpose was essentially to be someone who could go, how did you get that? Not only is John Watson there for our benefit, but he's also there to benefit Sherlock. He's there to sort of breathe life into this character. Even the things that we think we know about Sherlock's character, like his relationship with Irene Adler, they're not really shown, they're more just sort of assumed by Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson's function in the original narrative was to A, be our eyes and ears and ask the questions that we can't, and B, give Sherlock Holmes character. And maybe C, to legitimize Holmes's work. We don't really know much about John Watson beyond those things, and we don't need to, really, in those original stories. But as Sherlock Holmes, as a narrative has evolved through many different adaptations, so has the purpose of Dr. Watson's character. What's interesting though about Dr. Watson is that he's often written off as an idiot. When you watch all those sort of original Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes outings, they treated Dr. Watson very much like an idiot. It was written like a wingman almost, like this less interesting dude to make Sherlock Holmes more interesting, because the reality is we don't know enough about Sherlock for him to be interesting as a fully formed character, other than the fact that he solves crimes. So people compensated for that by making Dr. Watson an idiot, because that also lended humour. But when you sort of creep up to more recent versions, such as the Guy Ritchie films and Sherlock, we get a very different version of Dr. Watson. I love Jude Law's Dr. Watson actually. It is the closest version to John Watson that would have existed in the Victorian era had a person like him existed. And this sort of like gives me a nice segue into talking about, you know, their relationship, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. A lot of people see it as this best friendship, and that's, well, what it was. When you read the original stories, it was two men, you know, living together, have a good time, having a ball, and, you know, solving crimes, chilling out, smoking some pipe. Their relationship is more or less just founded on their mutual love for being clever, solving crimes, and also helping people. I don't think that's a thing that a lot of versions of Sherlock Holmes sort of focus on, is that, you know, Dr. Watson is a doctor, you know, he's a doctor, his job is to literally help people, cure people of their ills. Sherlock Holmes is a detective, like, his job is to help the people that can't be helped by anyone else in society. You know, these two men are very much drawn to each other, I think, because they care about people. They care about the people that nobody else wants to care about. And I feel like for me that's a big thing their friendship is founded on. Like Sherlock in BBC Sherlock very much only wants to solve things because of how clever he is, and John's always sort of sitting there going, don't you want to help these people? I think it's a far cry from the original Sherlock Holmes, who would wake Dr. Watson up in the middle of the night like, oh, we've got a client, they really need our help. But for me, that's what their friendship was about. It was about this mutual love of sharing the life that they did, and it was about, you know, a deep admiration for each other. You know, I think Sherlock Holmes did admire Dr. Watson quite for being a person that listened to him rather than a person that just dismissed him as a lunatic, and Dr. Watson equally admired Sherlock Holmes for being the lunatic that he was, the lunatic that helped people as much as he could. In BBC Sherlock, it doesn't come across as much as it should. You know, if you get the feeling that John is being dragged into these situations that he doesn't really want to be in, rather than something he essentially volunteered for. I find Dr. Watson in BBC Sherlock to be a very dark look at that character, which is interesting because for the most part Dr. Watson is not interpreted that way. He is interpreted as, you know, this sort of good-hearted bloke with a mad friend. Martin Freeman's version of the character is quite scary, and at times I find, you know, for someone whose job is to be our empathizer in a story, he's not very empathetic or sympathetic. John Watson, a very unforgiving character, which I think is an interesting quality for a doctor to have, and an army doctor at that. John Watson in BBC Sherlock kills a man for Sherlock, and they sort of walk away giggling. It was quite easy for him to kill a man for Sherlock Holmes, a man he'd essentially only met like a few days before. There's a very dark undertone in BBC Sherlock a lot of the time when it comes to talking about, you know, the foundation of Sherlock and John's friendship and what makes John a person. It's a decent interpretation to say that, you know, if John Watson really did love all this stuff, he's a bit of an adrenaline junkie, but I think it's an entirely other thing to say that he is this unforgiving force of reason. Going back to what I said the original character's purpose was, so his purpose is to be sympathetic, and I think a lot of the time, you know, John is that for Sherlock. In BBC Sherlock, you know, he's the sort of person that goes, what are we doing? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? What's going on? He does really fill that role quite well. Second point, Dr. Watson's point in the narrative, in the original narrative, is to make Sherlock Holmes a lovable character. And I definitely think that Martin Freeman does this in a much darker, more violent way than a lot of Dr. Watsons before him. Dr. Watson was meant to be this very calm, very collected person, despite what he'd been through. I think it's interesting that in BBC Sherlock we see a reversal of that. Sherlock is the one who appears more human in a lot of scenes with John because he is the one being calm, and John Watson, you know, is this person that we empathize with, and whose job is to be that, but he also is a very irrational person who gets angry very quickly, who has a very quick temper, doesn't give his friend a chance to explain himself. You know, when Sherlock is not being himself in a very negative, self-destructive way, John is often angry at him, almost like John is holding him up to an invisible standard that he never shares with Sherlock. And I think that this is a very interesting dynamic, because in the end I don't really view Martin and Ben's of the characters as friends. It is more a friendship founded on, oh, well, I'm an adrenaline junkie and I like what you do because it gives me adrenaline rushes, so I'll just stick around. And yeah, I kind of care about you, but not enough to stick around when you actually need someone to support you. Even though this is a very complex interpretation of John Watson as a character, it, for me, never matched up with the sort of very sweet, very caring doctor that was in the original stories. Which brings me to Joan. I've been a fan of Lucy Liu since I was a wee 10-year-old. 10-year-old? Yeah, I think I was 10 when I first watched it, Charlie's Angels. I'm a massive fan of Lucy Liu. I had never seen Johnny Lee Miller in anything and didn't know what to expect from him. Now he's one of my absolute favourite people on the planet, and I would literally give my left leg to him if he needed it. Don't know why he'd need my left leg, but if he asked, I would give it to him. Now I remember everyone was sort of like, oh my gosh, like not only is a woman, it's an Asian woman. Joan Watson is a character who is not what Doyle ever intended Dr. Watson to be, but is everything a good version of Dr. Watson should be. Joan is Sherlock's closest friend, and that doesn't happen automatically like it does in the original stories or Sherlock. That happens over a long period of time. You know, their initial relationship is sober companion and client, and over the first series, you know, you can see them, they grow to respect each other, admire each other, and what each other does. You know, the initial purpose of Dr. Watson being to be the audience eyes and ears. I think Joan does an excellent job of that because she manages to sort of present a lot of different audience perspectives. You know, being a woman of colour, she can speak for a lot more groups of people than, say, Martin Freeman could. The relationship with Sherlock is very concrete. It's very much an established part of her life. It is not the centre of her life, but it is very much an important part of it, and she makes that point to him. So Dr. Watson's purpose as a character, as I've already said, is to lend a legitimacy to Holmes's work, and I feel like the elementary writers established this straight away with Joan. You know, she is his sober companion. It is her job to be with Sherlock, like at the beginning. It's not just some random, like she's moved in with him. You know, it is totally justified. It is totally legitimized, and it is totally realistic. At the beginning of the video, I said it is the job of Dr. Watson to make Sherlock Holmes more human. And I think what the elementary writers have done, which is incredible of them, they have not just gone, well, Sherlock is not just the focus of our show, you know, Dr. Watson is too, and we're going to develop them both as characters, and they will also help each other grow as characters. And that is something that no other version of Sherlock Holmes that I have seen has actually done as successfully as the elementary writers have. You look at Joan and Sherlock when they start in series 1, Joan is unhappy in her job. She feels like that she is a failure as a surgeon. She's only being a sober companion out of some kind of deep-seated guilt that she let a client die. So look at Sherlock, he is a runaway, essentially, runaway rehabilitated slightly drug addict who is living in a house paid for by his father, you know, and solving crimes to distract himself from his addiction, and claiming that he doesn't need anyone or anything. And also, you know, he's heartbroken, which we learn pretty quickly. It's like one of my favourite moments. She's like, you look at people and you see so much. You see their flaws, you see everything that's wrong with them and everything that's right with them. And he said, yeah, and Sherlock goes, yeah, what's your point? And she says, well, I noticed that you don't have any mirrors around here. It's such a powerful moment. You look at them now they're partners in a business, this business of being consulting detectives. They are equal in every sense of the word, and that is massive. It goes beyond a relationship where they admire each other to a relationship where they see each other as equals. I really can't articulate enough how much more developed as characters Sherlock and Joan in Elementary are compared to even their original counterparts in the Conan Doyle stories. Within the first sort of 3 episodes of Elementary, you already learn like deeply personal things about Sherlock, and you learn them in a way that is not intrusive or involves a big story arc. You learn them through these tiny interactions. There's this one episode with this kid, and he has been abducted by this man called the Balloon Man, and he is rescued by the police, but the police haven't actually caught the Balloon Man himself, and the police suggest that they should send Adam, the kid, back to the Balloon Man because Adam has said that he misses him and they need to catch him, so they sort of figure that if they use Adam as bait, they'll catch the Balloon Man. And Sherlock has this really lovely little sort of line where he says, many victims of abuse become attached to their abusers, but that doesn't mean we should send them back for seconds. Same episode, he makes a remark about how he would trade his father in for a pair of Tic Tacs. There are all these little things we learn about Sherlock without actually learning the full story. It's developed, he develops, he tells Joan things, we learn that, Irene Adler broke his heart and that's why he overdosed. Sherlock is developed fully as a character, and so is Joan, and then together they also grow into better people. That is something that not even Conan Doyle did with the characters. It is something that is completely new and completely taking Sherlock Holmes beyond just solving crimes. It is taking Sherlock Holmes as a person and Dr. Watson as a person and putting them in the real world so that, they are actually relatable to people. Some of the episodes of Elementary are ridiculous. What was the one I watched the other day, and there was a freaking clown and it had poisoned the water supply, and I just sort of went, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was watching Batman. But even in the most out there episodes of Elementary, Sherlock and Joan remain characters that you can count on to be there for each other and to also be there for the audience to explain what's going on. As I've said in my reviews of the Sherlock season 4, that Sherlock and John just did not do in season 4, and that's one of the reasons that it flopped. Dr. Watson is a really important character, okay? And I know we can sit here and squabble all day about whether or not, him and Sherlock Holmes were having sex in 221B. That's not why he was important. He is important because he is the person that gives us Sherlock Holmes. And if you make him an idiot, then that means you're always going to see Sherlock as just a guy who's smarter than John Watson. I've always seen Dr. Watson as a mirror, essentially. He is a mirror. And however he sees the world and what his values are as a character is how we are going to see Sherlock Holmes. Unless you have developed Holmes as a character on his own, which a lot of writers do not do because they rely too heavily on Dr. Watson to be Sherlock Holmes' character, you get what you got as a Lion Detective in The Six Thatchers, where Sherlock is all over the place as a character. He's not consistent, he's not reliable. In Elementary, even when Sherlock and Joan are not together, we can rely on them to carry us through the story. John Watson is important. John Watson is the mirror through which we see Sherlock Holmes. So if you make him dumb, Sherlock Holmes is going to be a very shallow, very smart man. If you make him dark, like he is in BBC Sherlock, then Sherlock is only ever going to come across as a very dark person. But in Elementary, if you have a version of Dr. Watson that is very well developed, a very well-rounded human being, with flaws, but not flaws that can't be friggin' grown out of, then you're going to get a Sherlock that is the same. If you don't have an idea who John Watson is as a person, then you're not going to know who Sherlock Holmes is as a person. And I think that's my passionate rant about Dr. Watson for the day. Probably in my next Elementary or Sherlock, I'm going to look at Jim Moriarty as a villain, because I figure eventually I can't talk about Sherlock Holmes without talking about his arch nemesis. And yeah, thank you. Hope you're having a good winter or summer or whatever season it is where you are. Hope you're all being safe, and please like or comment or subscribe if you like my rants. And yeah, thank you guys. Bye.